Marcus had never seen so many Vakari in one place. The station's main conference hall had been cleared for what they called the Rite of Recognition, and it felt more like preparing for a military ceremony than a simple meeting. 12 war guardians had arrived on a ship that made every other vessel docked at the station look like a toy. And each of them moved with the same fluid grace and barely contained power that Marcus had noticed in Keth. "Nervous?" Keth asked, appearing beside him with that unsettling ability all Vakari seemed to have for moving silently. "Should I be?" Marcus replied, adjusting the clean uniform that Station Command had insisted he wear. It felt strange after years of coveralls and grease stains. "That depends on whether you have been honest about your motivations." Marcus looked at him sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" Keth's ears twitched in what Marcus had learned was amusement. "Peace, Marcus. It is not an accusation. But the rite of recognition is not simply a ceremony to thank you. It is an evaluation." "Of what?" "Of whether your actions came from true moral courage or mere impulse. Of whether you understand the responsibilities that come with being chosen by a war guardian. Of whether you are prepared for what that choice means." Before Marcus could ask what any of that meant, the doors to the conference hall opened and the other war guardians filed in. They moved in formation, Marcus noticed, like soldiers, but with an elegance that spoke of absolute confidence in their abilities. The leader was obviously the oldest. Her fur silver gray, where the others showed various shades of orange and black. She wore armor that looked both ceremonial and functional, and when her eyes met Marcus's, he felt like he was being measured against some invisible standard. "Marcus Chun of Earth," she said, her voice carrying easily through the large space. "I am Vel Thane, First War Guardian of the Hegemony Council. You stand before us because one of our own has made a claim." Marcus glanced at Keth, who nodded encouragingly. "What kind of claim?" "Keth Sharan has declared you worthy of the bond of guardianship. This is not a decision made lightly, nor one that can be taken back once confirmed." "I'm still not entirely sure what that means." Vel Thane gestured, and the other war guardians arranged themselves in a circle around Marcus and Keth. It was clearly a formal arrangement, probably with centuries of tradition behind it. "Tell me," Marcus Chun, Vel Thane said, "why did you open those cages?" It was the question Marcus had been asked a dozen times over the past 4 days, by station security, Justice Council representatives, and even his own supervisor. But somehow, standing in this circle of alien warriors, it felt like the first time anyone had really wanted to know the answer. "Because they were people," Marcus said simply. "Intelligent beings locked in cages." "That's not right?" "But you did not know who they were. You did not know their importance or their capabilities. For all you knew, they could have been dangerous criminals." Marcus thought about that. Even criminals don't deserve to be sold as entertainment. One of the younger war guardians spoke up. "But was it your responsibility? You were there to repair machinery, not to involve yourself in political situations." "I wasn't thinking about responsibility," Marcus admitted. "I saw beings in cages who needed help. Everything else was secondary." Vel Thane and Keth exchanged a look that Marcus couldn't interpret. The older war guardian began walking around the circle, and Marcus noticed that each of the others watched her with absolute attention. "Keth Sharan has told us of your actions," she said as she walked. "How you freed them without hesitation. How you risked your own safety to buy them time to escape. How you sabotaged the ship of their captors to delay pursuit." "I did what anyone would do." "No." The word was sharp enough to make Marcus flinch. "You did what you believed was right, regardless of the personal cost. This is not common behavior, Marcus Chun, even among those who consider themselves good people." Another war guardian, this one with distinctive black stripes across his muzzle, stepped forward. "I am Torvalen, Second War Guardian. Tell me, human, what do you know of the Vakari?" Marcus looked around the circle. "Not much, honestly. Keth told me you're some kind of elite warriors, that you protect people you consider worthy." "We are more than warriors," Torvalen said. "We are guardians of principle. For 3,000 years, the Vakari have stood against injustice wherever we find it. We do not serve governments or trade agreements or political convenience. We serve ideals. That must make you unpopular with politicians. Several of the war guardians made sounds that might have been laughter. Velthane's ears twitched with what Marcus was learning to recognize as approval. Indeed it does, she said, which is why war guardians choose their bonds carefully. When we decide to protect someone, it is not just a professional obligation. It is a recognition that this person embodies the principles we have sworn to defend. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. And Keth thinks I embody your principles? Keth Sharon has observed you under pressure, a new voice said. Marcus turned to see a female war guardian with unusual golden-orange fur. He has seen you choose moral action over personal safety. He has seen you act without thought of reward or recognition. These are the qualities we look for. But that's just normal human behavior, Marcus protested. The silence that greeted this statement was telling. Velthane stopped walking and studied Marcus with an expression that seemed to mix sadness with something that might have been hope. Tell me, Marcus Chun, she said quietly, how many other humans were on that station when the Korath ship docked? Marcus thought about it. Maybe 300? It's a big station. And how many of them went to investigate when the Korath ship showed unusual life support readings? I was the only maintenance tech on duty for that sector. How many of them might have had legitimate reasons to be in that area of the ship? Marcus saw where this was going. I don't know. Probably dozens. Food service, cleaning crews, security patrols. And yet, only you opened those cages? The weight of that statement settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. He'd been thinking of his actions as normal, as what anyone would do. But the war guardians were right. Hundreds of people had been on the station, many of them with access to that area of the ship, and only he had acted. This is why the bond of guardianship is rare, Keth said quietly. Most beings, when faced with a choice between moral action and personal safety, choose safety. You did not hesitate. I hesitated plenty, Marcus said. I thought about just fixing the cooling system and walking away. But you did not do it, Velthane pointed out. The fact that you considered your options makes your choice more meaningful, not less. Another war guardian stepped forward, younger than the others with fur that was almost pure black. I am Sek Karan. I was among those you freed. I want to tell you something that Keth Sharon may not have mentioned. Marcus looked at Keth, who nodded for the younger guardian to continue. When you first approached our cages, Sek Karan said, I thought you were another captor coming to inspect the merchandise. Even when you began working on the locks, I assumed you were checking their security. When did you realize I was helping? When you opened the first cage and asked if we could help the others. Your first thought was not your own safety or even our gratitude. It was whether we could help our companions. In that moment, I understood what Keth had seen in you. Velthane resumed her walking. But now she moved closer to Marcus, studying him with the intensity of someone making a final decision. The right of recognition has 3 parts, she announced formally. The first is testimony, which we have heard. The second is the declaration of intent. She stopped directly in front of Keth, who straightened into what was obviously a military posture. Keth Sharon, Third War Guardian of the Hegemony Council, state your intent. I, Keth Sharon, formally request bond of guardianship with Marcus. Chun of Earth, I have observed his character under pressure and found him worthy of protection. I declare him to be one who embodies the principles we are sworn to defend. I offer my service, my loyalty, and my life in his defense. The formal words sent a shiver through Marcus that he couldn't explain. There was something in Keth's voice, a depth of commitment that made the offer both humbling and terrifying. Marcus Chun, Velthane turned to him. Do you understand what has been offered? I think so, Marcus said slowly. Keth is volunteering to be my bodyguard? Several of the war guardians made those sounds that might have been laughter again. Much more than a bodyguard, Tor Valen said. A war guardian's bond is for life. Keth Sharan is offering to dedicate his existence to ensuring your safety and supporting your endeavors. He is declaring that your life has value worth protecting above his own. Marcus looked at Keth in shock. That's insane. I'm nobody special. I fix machines for a living. You freed 12 war guardians from slavery, Keth replied calmly. You risked everything to help beings you had never met, with no thought of reward. If that is not special, then the word has no meaning. But why me? Why not someone important? A diplomat or a scientist or someone who could actually make a difference in the galaxy? Velthane's expression grew thoughtful. What makes you believe that mechanics cannot make a difference in the galaxy? Marcus thought about the question. I work with my hands. I fix things that are broken. I don't make Pollock. Marcus had been working on the Korath cooling system for 3 hours when he felt the ship shudder slightly. It was the kind of vibration that meant someone had just docked with the station, probably at one of the emergency airlocks. He allowed himself a small smile as he tightened a coupling that didn't really need tightening. The Korath captain appeared at the top of the maintenance shaft, his forearms gesturing impatiently. Human, what is your progress? Getting there, Marcus called back. Found a few more problems than I expected. Your secondary manifold has some microfractures, and the pressure regulation system needs recalibration. I'd say another couple hours minimum. The lie came easily. Marcus had actually finished the real repairs within the first hour. Everything since then had been carefully introducing new problems that would take time to diagnose properly. A loose connection here, a slightly misaligned component there. Nothing that would damage the ship, but enough to keep them docked. This is unacceptable, the captain rumbled. We have a schedule to maintain. Hey, you want it done fast or you want it done right? Marcus shrugged. I can slap a patch on it and you can try to make it to your next port. But if the cooling system fails in hyperspace, you're looking at a core breach and a very bad day. The Korath captain made what was probably a curse in his native language and disappeared back up the shaft. Marcus heard him talking rapidly to someone, likely arranging for a different mechanic. But Marcus was the only certified alien systems specialist on this shift, and getting a replacement would take even longer than letting him finish. 20 minutes later, Marcus's comm unit chimed with an incoming message from station security. His heart rate spiked, but he forced himself to read it calmly. Maintenance Chief Chun, please report to security office. 7 at your earliest convenience for routine. Questioning regarding irregular life support readings from Docking Bay 7, not urgent. Marcus closed the message and went back to his fake repairs. The escaped beings had obviously made it to the station and triggered some kind of automated system. The fact that security was calling it routine and not urgent meant they didn't consider it an emergency yet. They probably thought it was just a sensor malfunction, but it also meant he was officially involved now. Whatever happened next, there would be questions. Marcus was so focused on his thoughts that he almost missed the soft sound of movement behind him. He spun around, tool in hand, and found himself face to face with the feline being he'd freed first. The one who'd acted as their leader. Jesus, Marcus whispered. What are you doing here? I thought you guys got out. The being held up one clawed hand in what was clearly a calming gesture. It had removed the pulsing collar somehow, and without it, Marcus could see that it moved with a fluid grace that spoke of serious combat training. The torn clothing had been replaced with something that looked like it had come from station stores. We did escape, the being said. And Marcus was surprised to hear it speaking standard galactic with only a slight accent. My name is Keth Sharan. I have come to return a debt? You don't owe me anything, Marcus said quickly. I just did what anybody would do. Keth's ears flattened slightly, and Marcus caught what might have been amusement in the alien's expression. That is not true, and we both know it. What you did was dangerous and unnecessary. You could have simply completed your task and left. Yeah, well, I've never been good at ignoring things that bother me. This troubles me, Keth said, settling into a crouch that put them at eye level. You speak as if helping enslaved beings is a small thing. As if any person would do the same. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Look, I don't know how things work where you come from, but where I'm from, you don't just walk away from something like that. Where I come from? Keth said quietly. Such nobility is rare enough that we have ceremonies to honor it. Before Marcus could respond to that, his cum unit chimed again. This time it was an emergency alert from the Korath ship's bridge. All maintenance personnel report to stations immediately. Prepare for emergency departure. Marcus and Keth looked at each other. They're trying to leave, Marcus said. The station will not permit departure until the inquiry is complete. Keth replied, What inquiry? Keth's ears twitched, and what Marcus was learning meant amusement. The one that began when 12 members of the Vakari warrior caste requested emergency asylum from the station commander. Marcus stared at him. Vakari warrior caste? I thought you guys were just, I don't know, prisoners or something. We were prisoners, Keth confirmed. But not just anything. Before Keth could explain further, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the maintenance shaft. Multiple Korath were heading their way, and they sounded agitated. You need to go, Marcus said. No. Keth's voice carried a note of authority that made Marcus look at him more carefully. You need to come with me. I can't just leave. They'll know I sabotaged their ship. Marcus Chun, Keth said, and hearing his name in that growling voice sent an odd shiver down his spine. Do you trust me? It was a crazy question. He'd known this being for all of 4 hours, most of which had been spent watching him escape from slavery. But looking into those reflecting eyes, Marcus found himself nodding. Good, Keth said. Then follow my lead. The Korath captain appeared at the top of the maintenance shaft, along with 3 other members of his crew. All 4 of them were armed now, Marcus noticed. Weapon belts that hadn't been there before. Human! The captain barked. Step away from the cargo. Cargo? Marcus looked around in confusion. What cargo? The escaped specimen. We have tracking data indicating it is in your location. Keth stood slowly, moving to place himself partially in front of Marcus. I am not cargo, Korath. I am Keth Sharan, Third War Guardian of the Vakari Hegemony. The effect of those words on the Korath was immediate and dramatic. All 4 of them took a step back, and Marcus heard one of them make a sound that might have been a whimper. Impossible, the captain said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. War Guardians are extinct. Reports of our extinction have been greatly exaggerated, Keth replied dryly. Though your people have certainly tried hard enough to make it true. Marcus looked between them, trying to understand what was happening. War Guardian? What's a War Guardian? Tell him, Keth said to the Korath captain, not taking his eyes off the aliens. Tell him what you and your people have done. The captain's 4 arms were trembling now. We were told they were standard prisoners. Criminals being transported for justice? Justice? Keth's voice dropped to a growl that made the hair on Marcus's neck stand up. 12 War Guardians, including 2 adolescents not yet of age, captured during a diplomatic mission and sold to arena masters for entertainment. What justice is there in that? Marcus felt his blood run cold. Arena masters? The beings you helped escape, Keth said, without looking away from the Korath, were destined for combat arenas, to be forced to fight for the amusement of crowds until we died or were too broken to continue. The pieces clicked into place for Marcus. The collars, the cages, the way the Korath had called them cargo and specimens. These weren't just prisoners. They were slaves being sold for gladiatorial combat. You sick bastards, Marcus said. Stepping forward before he could think better of it, the Korath captain swung his weapon toward Marcus, but Keth moved faster than seemed possible. One moment he was standing beside Marcus. The next he was somehow behind the captain with one clawed hand at the alien's throat. You will not threaten him, Keth said softly. The other 3 Korath raised their weapons. But they were clearly afraid to fire with their captain at risk. War Guardian, one of them said in a shaking voice. We did not know. We were told you were criminals. Even if we were criminals, Keth replied, does that justify slavery? Does that justify selling sentient beings for entertainment? Marcus's cum unit chimed again, this time with a station-wide announcement. Attention all ships and personnel. This is Commander Torres. Waystation Omega-7 is now under full security lockdown. No vessels will be permitted to depart pending investigation of charges including slavery, trafficking of sentient beings, and assault on diplomatic personnel. All armed individuals will surrender their weapons immediately or face consequences. The Korath looked at each other with expressions that didn't need translation. It seems, Keth said pleasantly, that your schedule has been permanently altered. Over the next hour, Marcus found himself caught up in events that felt more like a political thriller than his normal maintenance routine. Station security arrived to arrest the Korath crew. Representatives from something called the Galactic Justice Council appeared as if they'd been waiting nearby. And Marcus learned more about galactic politics than he'd ever wanted to know. The Vakari, it turned out, were something like a cross between elite special forces and diplomatic protection. War Guardians were their most elite members. Warriors trained from birth to protect not just their own people, but any beings they deemed worthy of protection. It's not a job you apply for, Keth explained as they sat in a station security office, giving statements. It's not even really a choice. Young Vakari who show the right qualities are selected for training. Those who complete the training become War Guardians. And the 12 of you were on some kind of diplomatic mission? Peace, Nigo. Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands on his already stained coveralls and squinted. At the massive cargo hauler floating in Bay 7, the Korathan vessel looked like someone had taken a city block and decided it needed to fly through space. Its dark metal hull bore scars from countless journeys through hostile territories, and the registration codes were written in the flowing script that hurt his eyes to look at for too long. Another day? Another alien ship that makes no sense, he muttered, grabbing his toolkit from the workbench. The repair order said something about engine coolant leaks, but Marcus had learned not to trust the translations. Half the time, what aliens called a coolant leak turned out to be something completely different. Waystation Omega-7 saw all kinds of ships and species pass through its docking bays. As the primary maintenance chief for the civilian sector, Marcus had worked on vessels from dozens of different worlds. Some were elegant pieces of engineering that made human technology look like stone tools. Others were so alien in design that he spent hours just figuring out which end was the front. The Korath were somewhere in between. Their ships were built like fortresses, all thick armor and redundant systems. They reminded Marcus of the old Earth battleships his grandfather used to show him in history books. Except these were the size of shopping malls and could travel faster than light. Marcus climbed the access ramp and immediately noticed the smell. Every species had their own scent, and he'd gotten used to most of them. The Korath ships usually smelled like ozone and something that reminded him of cinnamon. This one smelled wrong. Underneath the expected odors was something else, something that made his nose wrinkle and his stomach turn slightly. "Hello?" he called out in Standard Galactic. His accent was thick, but most species could understand him well enough. "Maintenance crew here for repairs." A Korath appeared from deeper in the ship, moving with the heavy, deliberate steps of his kind. They were tall beings, nearly 8 feet when fully upright, with thick gray skin and 4 arms. This one wore the traditional robes of a merchant captain, deep purple with silver threading that indicated his family's trading house. "Human," the Korath said, his translator rendering the words in a bass rumble. "You are here for the cooling systems." "That's me," Marcus nodded. "Where's the problem area?" The Korath gestured toward the rear of the ship with 2 of his arms. "Lower deck. The leaking has become worse during our last journey. We cannot reach port if it continues." Marcus followed the alien through corridors that were clearly designed for beings much larger than humans. The ceiling was high enough that he could have jumped and still not touched it. The walls were lined with panels covered in the flowing Korath script, and soft lighting strips provided a dim amber illumination dot as they walked. Marcus noticed other sounds echoing through the ship. Mechanical noises were normal, but there was something else. A rhythmic tapping, almost like Morse code, coming from somewhere below them. "What's that tapping?" Marcus asked. The chorus's pace didn't change. "Cargo shifting. The artificial gravity fluctuates during coolant malfunctions." Marcus nodded, though something about the answer felt off. The tapping was too regular, too purposeful to be random cargo movement. But alien ships had all kinds of strange systems, and he'd learned not to question everything that seemed odd. They reached a maintenance access panel that led to the lower deck. The Korath captain pressed his palm against the scanner, and the hatch cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. "The cooling systems are through there," the Korath said. "I must attend to other matters. Find me when repairs are complete." Marcus descended into the lower deck and immediately knew something was very wrong. The smell was stronger here, a mixture of unwashed bodies, fear, and something that reminded him of the animal shelters he'd volunteered at back on Earth. The tapping was louder too, and now he could hear other sounds. Soft whimpering. The shuffle of movement in confined spaces. His hand instinctively went to the emergency beacon on his belt, but he forced himself to stay calm. Maybe this was normal for Korath ships. Maybe they transported animals for trade. There were plenty of legitimate reasons for these sounds and smells, but as Marcus moved deeper into the lower deck, following his scanner's readings toward the coolant systems, he saw the first cage. It was tucked into an alcove, partially hidden behind a stack of supply crates. Inside was a being unlike any he'd seen before. It stood about 6 feet tall on powerful legs, covered in fur that shifted between deep orange and black in a pattern that seemed to move in the dim light. The head was distinctly feline, with large ears and eyes that reflected the available light like mirrors. The being was clearly intelligent. It wore torn clothing that had once been fine, and around its neck was a collar that pulsed with a soft red light. When it saw Marcus, it pressed against the bars of the cage and made a sound that was part growl, part plea. Marcus felt his stomach drop. This wasn't cargo. This was a prisoner. He looked around and saw more cages hidden throughout the lower deck. All of them contained beings of the same species, all wearing the pulsing collars. Some were larger, some smaller. A few looked to be juveniles. All of them watched him with the same desperate intelligence. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, then louder, "Hey, can any of you understand me?" The nearest being, the one who'd first seen him, nodded frantically. It pointed to its collar and then made a cutting gesture across its throat. The meaning was clear. Marcus's mind raced. He was alone on an alien ship, probably in the middle of some kind of slave trade. The smart thing would be to fix the cooling system, get paid, and report what he'd seen to station security. Let the authorities handle it. But he'd seen the intelligence in those eyes. He'd seen the way they'd reached out to him, hoping for help. And Marcus Chun had never been particularly smart. When it came to doing the right thing instead of the safe thing, he approached the nearest cage and examined the lock. It was Korath technology designed for their four-handed operation. But Marcus had been working on alien tech for 15 years, and he'd developed a talent for making things work even when he didn't fully understand them. "Okay," he said softly to the caged being. "Let's see what we can do." The lock was electronic, tied into the ship's main computer system. But it also had a manual override, probably for emergencies. Marcus pulled a multi-tool from his kit and started working on the access panel. As he worked, he became aware that all the beings in the other cages were watching him intently. The soft whimpering had stopped. Even the tapping had ceased. It was as if they were all holding their breath. The lock cycled open with a soft click, the feline being immediately pushed out of the cage, stretching limbs that had clearly been cramped for too long. It looked at Marcus with an expression that seemed to mix gratitude with surprise, as if it couldn't quite believe what was happening. "Can you help the others?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the other cages. The being nodded and moved with fluid grace to the nearest cage. It spoke in a language of soft growls and purrs, and Marcus heard hope creep into the responses from the other prisoners. Working together, they began opening the other cages. Marcus handled the locks while the first being he'd freed helped the others out and seemed to be organizing them. There were 12 in total, ranging from what looked like adolescents to fully grown adults. As the last cage opened, Marcus heard footsteps on the deck above. Heavy footsteps. Korath footsteps. "We need to move," he said, though he wasn't sure how much they understood. "Do any of you know how to get off this ship?" The first being, who seemed to be their leader, pointed toward the rear of the deck and spoke in its growling language. Two of the others nodded and moved toward what looked like a service airlock. "Wait," Marcus said. "Those collars. They're probably tracking devices." He pulled out his toolkit again and examined one of the collars more closely. It was definitely more than just a restraint. The red pulsing light was connected to sophisticated electronics, probably monitoring location and vital signs. "I can try to disable them, but it might take time we don't have." The leader of the group understood. It gestured to the others and spoke rapidly. Then it approached Marcus and placed a clawed hand gently on his shoulder. It looked directly into his eyes and spoke a single word that the universal translator couldn't parse. But the meaning was clear. "Thank you." The footsteps above were getting closer, and Marcus could hear voices now. The Korath captain and at least two others. "Go," Marcus said. "I'll try to buy you some time." But the leader shook its head. It pointed to Marcus, then to itself, then made a gesture that looked like protection. It wasn't going to leave him behind. "I'll be fine," Marcus insisted. "I'm just maintenance crew. They won't hurt me. But if they find you here—" The sound of the hatch opening made the decision for them. Light flooded down from above as multiple Korath descended into the lower deck. Marcus quickly closed his toolkit and moved toward the coolant system, trying to look like he'd been working on repairs the whole time. "Human!" The captain's voice boomed through the space. "What is your status?" "Found the problem," Marcus called back, not turning around. "Looks like a cracked coupling in the secondary coolant line. I'll need to replace it." He heard the Korath moving through the lower deck, and his heart hammered as he realized they woo.